Good afternoon, and welcome to Praxis Peace Institute's Friday Forum. I'm Georgia Kelly, the director of Praxis. Today, we are hosting a very accomplished guest, a conflict specialist, strategist, and activist. Dilafruz Khonikboyeva is the executive director of Patagonia's Home Planet Fund, which is based in Ventura, California. And as many of you know, Patagonia is the funder of this organization, but it also is a triple bottom line business that donates 1% of its sales to environmental causes. Dilafruz received a master's degree in conflict analysis and resolution from George Mason University and was a presidential leadership scholar who served as a senior advisor and political appointee during the Biden-Harris administration. She also spent 5 years as the global lead for the Aga Khan Development Network, which improves the quality of life in Asia and Africa. She served on the board of the Jimmy and Rosalind Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution at George Mason University and led the Climate Change Working Group for Women of Color Advancing Peace, Security, and Conflict Transformation. Dilafruz is an indigenous Pamiri from Tajikistan, and she has an essay in this wonderful book called Our Biggest Deal, Pathways to Planetary Prosperity. And you can get that online. It's called Our Biggest Deal. And the author is Aaron William Perry. And many people contributed to this book. And I'm actually one of them who did also. But this is what brought me to Dilafruz, was reading her essay there. So welcome, Dilafruz. It's wonderful to have you with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Georgia. It's a pleasure, and I'm really excited at what you've built here and to now get exposure to this community. So thank you for welcoming me in.
I'm just muting some people because I'm hearing some background noise. So I will be able to call on people after I finish the interview. Then I'll call on people who are on the call, and you can unmute when I call on you. So to begin with, I'd like to have you tell us a little bit about Patagonia, just so people have a background of the company that has founded and supported this Home Planet Fund. You can give me a little bit about their ideas, their ethics, how they function as a business.
Absolutely. So Patagonia, many people, their exposure to them is probably their clothing, their
Mhm.
outdoor gear. Um, but it's so much more. So I just as a very quick way of talking about it, Yvonne Chouinard started in this very interesting generation in the 60s and beyond that was really keen on mountain climbing and outdoor activity and surfing. And for him and his friends, they wanted to do that meaningfully. They wanted to do it, in line with nature. And then they also wanted to do it safely. And so Yvonne is officially on paper what he started is a blacksmith. So he created pitons, which are something you use when you're climbing up mountains. You hammer them into the rock face. And I think the first example of Patagonia is one, the functionality of it, like it was meant to be something that he could ensure the safety of him and his friends. But then two, the more he kept visiting the same mountains, he realized that the pitons were actually destroying the mountain. Like he could see, the like dozens of people who had used their pitons over years. And so even though the business at that point had grown and it was beyond him and his friends, he just felt like it wasn't in line with his ethics and the ethics of his friends, which is this nature is meant to be enjoyed and preserved for future generations. So he did something that I think many people would never imagine, which is he stopped that whole business. He wrote a letter explaining why, and then he created, like he innovated new alternatives to that. And I love that story because I think it shows the basis of why Patagonia exists. It's just very functional and practical. And that it's always made really hard decisions. And when push comes to shove between making money and actually living the ethics, Yvonne always chooses that. And so I think some things maybe like little one-liners people are used to hearing about with Patagonia is Let My People Go Surfing, which is an ideology and a book that Yvonne wrote. And it's this idea that we can have business unusual. You don't have to give up your identity. We don't have to have this very especially like in the 80s and such, this very like toxic, rigid corporate culture. You can be this thriving individual who also thinks about the thriving environment and um, and make a business, that aligns with all that. I think fast forwarding many years, maybe the other time you all might have heard about Yvonne in Patagonia is in 2022. He essentially gave away the business, and now the planet Earth is essentially the shareholder of Patagonia. So in perpetuity, all decisions that are made at the executive and board level have to consider the planet, and everything is aligned around that. And every year, when the company has any extra profits, it goes directly into this work around nonprofits and environmental activism. And so there's so much more to Patagonia. There are people who know a lot more and have lived it. But for me, those two anecdotes say a lot about why this place is special.
And this is fascinating, some of the stories about Yvonne too. I wanted to ask you about the 1% for the planet also, because Patagonia was a founding member of that organization and it works internationally. So can you tell us maybe some of the projects that the 1% for the planet has been able to um, promote and succeed at internationally?
Yeah, that's another example of the business unusual. So when Patagonia shifted its business and started making a profit again after moving away from pitons and moving from, at that time, what they called hardware, like the pitons, into software, which is kind of all these material goods and before the tech version of software existed, they imposed something internally on themselves called the Earth tax, which meant that 1% of all profits would go to things in Ventura County and maybe things down in Patagonia that they really cared about to protect the lands and waters. And after doing that for quite some time, they said, we shouldn't be the only ones who want to do this. Other people might be interested. So then that's where 1% for the planet was made. And now it's a separate entity led by Kate Williams, who also has an essay in that book with Georgia and I. Um, they're really amazing. And there have been so many different companies in the US and abroad who have signed on, which means they dedicate that 1% of all their profits go to environmental entities. 1% does incredible work, right? So, for example, Home Planet Fund, which we'll tell you about, is a member of 1% for the planet, which means we can receive funds from other entities. They do a lot of grouping, like there's one project people want to work on together, but they also let people do their own thing. And Kate Williams over there is building out some new exciting stuff. I don't want to steal her thunder from the essay, so I'll just leave it at that.
I might try to get her too. She's in Oakland, I believe.
She's out in Vermont, actually.
Oh, I thought she was in Oakland. Okay.
I
Well,
think they shifted.
that's good to know. Well, now I want to get to the Home Planet Fund and what some of the work that the fund is promoting and actually succeeding in doing in East Africa. I was fascinated by what is happening with the indigenous groups in East Africa and what they are doing to help the planet. So I'd like you to explain some of that because I think it's so inspiring.
Yeah, would you like me to go right into East Africa, or do you want me to give some background on Home
Go
Planet?
ahead, give some background. Yes.
Okay, yeah. So Home Planet Fund, Yvonne for a very long time talked about business unusual, but over the last 2 decades, he's been really keen on what is philanthropy unusual. He really didn't want to start a big family foundation. He didn't want to become like a big name in philanthropy. He just wanted to find ways to do good work, and he was really looking internationally. So that's how I was bought on, and that's why Home Planet Fund is a separate entity, is it really is meant to complement and do something different from what Patagonia does, what 1% for the planet does. So our focus is across three ways that's quite different from the way Patagonia usually works. One is we're really keen on underfunded and under-resourced places. So I think we all know like the amount of attention that the Amazon or rainforests get, right? But our world is an ecosystem. We can't just take care of, for example, the lung, but then leave the rest of the organs or something else. And so, how do we take care of the neglected parts of our ecologies around the world? So we fund in those places. Two is a lot of the times when you fund nonprofits, especially internationally, frequently, the nonprofit in the US maybe takes 10, 20% to fund themselves. And then maybe if it gets to Kenya and Nairobi, they take another 10, 20%. And by the time it gets to communities, it's cents on the dollar. So we actually fund directly into community groups. It looks very different in different contexts, but for example, in the Pacific, we fund women's collectives. In East Africa, we fund into Maasai, like Ma Samburu peoples, actual community entities. And three, we're really interested in what has been proven out to work. In the academic science sense, this is called nature-based solutions. We call them indigenous solutions because these communities have been doing them for like thousands upon thousands of years, and they've been proven out because of the health of the lands and waters. East Africa is one of our four ecologies. We work in about 80% of Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, and that's because the grasslands there are really important in biodiversity and carbon. So grasslands are really important carbon sink. So pulling carbon out of the sky and making sure that it doesn't kind of continue to heat our planet. But two, the grasslands themselves are actually incredible ecologies for biodiversity. I know when we think of rich biodiversity, we think of rainforests, but actually these grasslands are incredible. And they're not only home to these really important big migratory animals like elephants or giraffes, and then the lions and the hyenas who follow them, right, twice a year. But actually, the different flora and fauna, the smaller ones who actually live within the grasslands, are critical. So the Ma peoples, which include Maasai and Samburu, are pastoralists, which means they take their animals to graze with the seasons. And actually, the grazing is really critical because when the grass grows above a certain height, one, it no longer stores carbon at the same efficiency, but two, actually, the giraffes and the elephants and all of those don't want to eat that old kind of grass. They're really interested in those new little sprouts. So with the Samburu and Maasai people being able to graze, they leave behind enough sunlight for these little sprouts to grow, and then the elephants and all of those follow. So I'll stop speaking, but I'm really fascinated by their work, and I'm really proud of our communities on the ground and what they've done.
One of the things you wrote about in the essay was that the work being done, I guess not just in Africa, maybe it's the other places too, but that it's affecting 1% of the land mass of the planet. Can you say something about that?
That's right. I mean, I think sometimes, especially in the environmental and climate movements, there's this idea that humanity and humans are divorced from the planet. And I think it comes into this from this place that we are the harm that's being done. So by eliminating us from it and locking up land or conserving land separate from people, um, it's how it's the best way to take care of people. And in this case, actually, the places we work are very large, critical tracts of land. Like again, 80% of these countries or seven island nations in the Pacific. But there's relatively few people. And so for us, we only pick these four places to work because according to the UNFCCC data, where all of the scientists pool their information, these are the four ecosystems that have basically a tipping point. They will have an outsized impact. And so the 1% is less that we're impressive, frankly. It's that these communities have been, for how little their numbers are as people, they've been taking care of this land for so long. And now we're giving them the money, the tools, the seeds, the other resources to be able to take care of these large critical tracts of land.
And what kind of money does that require to do that sort of thing?
Yeah, it's certainly less than the US. So, for example, the first 2 years of our East Africa work across three countries was 5 million. So it's the cost on the dollar is very, very good for working in 80% of three massive countries. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty extraordinary. I wanted to bring out because I thought it was very interesting that you also mentioned in your essay about the fact that Home Planet Fund does not deal with these high-priced galas or fundraising activities. And I live in a town where there is a fundraising activity going on every month, at least one, maybe more than one. So it's a constant, lunches and galas and festivities and all this. And a lot of money goes toward the fundraising activities. And I know when we did them early on, I was realizing we're spending all this time and all this money, and it's not bringing in that much. Um, and so I had sort of relook at the whole thing, and I realized that you started out saying, "No, we're not going to do those things." So I'd like you to talk a little bit about that and how you got to that decision.
I would say a lot of Home Planet Fund is like the vision that I came in and presented based on what Patagonia had done, what Yvonne wanted. But one of the core things that he's always talked about, and I really agree with this, is like no fluff. No fluff. I only have two staff. If we need outside help, we bring in consultants in country, but we are a very lean machine. And that's because the reality is me sitting in Ventura, I'm not actually saving the planet, right? Like the people who are saving the planet deserve the time, deserve the money, deserve the effort. And so it's one of the other reasons why I think the Home Planet Fund model is so interesting is because Yvonne and Patagonia were so generous in giving us 20 million to start, we can ensure that any other donation that comes in, 100% goes to the field. Like we have a lean overhead, we have the money to support ourselves. And so that's really important to us because Home Planet Fund's impact is not me, it's not our staff, it's those people on the ground. And if we can all fully support them in every way they need, that's actually the real healing for the planet and ourselves.
And of course, your job is very important, or it wouldn't happen. So we don't want to
Sure.
sell that short.
No,
Um,
no, no, I'm not. But it's like I think sometimes, like you said, like galas in so many spaces feel like they're necessary, but like you said, me sitting at a gala to talk about my opinion doesn't feel as worthwhile as, being able to get someone into the field and take video and then bring that information back.
it's definitely an unusual philanthropic model. And that's what I think it's very interesting and it gives people other ways of looking at fundraising. Um, I wanted to bring up something else that you talk about that I think is really important, and that is the indigenous storytelling. You come out of a culture where there is a lot of, I'm sure, indigenous storytelling that has been an oral tradition for probably centuries. And what we've seen in our modern world is the academic world tends to discount the indigenous storytelling because they're not written down, they don't have citations, they don't have data from other books, and it's not, I guess, respected the same way that academic research is respected. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about the importance of the indigenous storytelling and how we can get people more involved in it and respectful of it.
Thank you for that. That is so close to my heart, obviously, personally,
Mhm.
but professionally. I think we really struggled with this because Home Planet Fund was only announced to the world less than 2 years ago. We spent the initial 2+ years doing the work and wanting to make sure we had 2 years of impact data before we ever told anybody about us. And when it came to like, we knew our name, but we didn't know anything else. And when it came to talking about us, we really struggled with this because like you said, there's so much respect for Western academia. And so even the choice to say nature-based solution or indigenous solutions is taking, which shouldn't be, but is actually a very political and polarizing stance. And so for us, I think we're quite lucky. We have someone named Dar Jamil. He's a war journalist. He's written many climate books. He's just brilliant. And he really is helping us create a narrative that explains where the Western science and the indigenous knowledge is using similar phrasing and they mean the same things. And then, so I think one that's important is like in all of the ecologies in which we work, we know the indigenous terminology about it. And then the science is relatively new, right? It's anywhere from like 2 years to 100 years, but that's new compared to thousands of years of proof. So I think one that's important is we help translate that in our communications. But two, even more is like, for example, when we talk about the solstice in my culture, for example, the word solstice in English has the etymologies it does, right? But there is not necessarily a feeling behind it or an implication. Whereas the word for solstice in like one of my Pomede languages is not only that the sun is at its extremes in the sky, it denotes a depression, it denotes a mania, it denotes like the relationship that you have to the land in a specific time. And I think that that's what's so important for us is so much of the world we've built today is for the ease of humans, and yet a lot of it is a disconnect from the land and the water. And we want to just at least show where some communities have kept that and give those of us who maybe sometimes feel lost or disconnected a way to go back and a home because it is a part of us and we're a part of nature.
Right. And last, before I open it up for questions from people on the call, I'd like to have you tell us a little bit about the work that Home Planet Fund is doing in your home country in Tajikistan, and maybe a little bit about your country. I don't think I know anyone who's been there. but after reading about you, I want to go.
Yes,
I
come.
want to see what it's like. So maybe tell us a little bit about it and about the project that Home Planet Fund is helping with there.
Yeah. So our work in Tajikistan and Afghanistan is one of our core ecologies. The reason we work there is because there are glaciers between Tajikistan, Afghanistan, and Pakistan that are called the third pole of the world. It starts in Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Pakistan, and extends out into the Tibetan Plateau. But the vast majority of those glaciers are Tajikistan, Pakistan. And they're called the third pole of the world because between the North and South Pole and them, they control global weather patterns like winds, moisture, etc. And then two, they provide direct glacial water access to 2 billion people, including India and China. And so it's a part of the world that people, like you said, aren't familiar with, but it is an outsized critical climate, impact. And so the work we do in Tajikistan and Afghanistan is we do agroforestry, like regenerative agriculture, and we do, rebuilding of trees, like replanting of trees in something called the Miyawaki method, which is a three-tier system. So at the base, you're doing regenerative agriculture with like local varieties of legumes and wheats that do very well in that soil. Next is a bush layer, so berries and other things that are edible, but continue to get some of that nitrogen and all of these nutrients back into the soil. And the top canopy layer is the fruiting trees that are native to the area, so walnuts, apples, apricots, etc. And it's a really fast way to heal the soil, but provide top cover. And another really important thing about glaciers is in order to contain their moisture, by doing tree planting and regenerative agriculture right up against them, it helps to retain their cool and moisture and circle kind of that moisture back in. And so we do that in Tajikistan, where I'm from. Tajikistan is the smallest former Soviet republic. It became a country and independent in 1991. It went through a really massive civil war from 91 to 97. The mountains are about 80% of the landmass, and the total population of Tajikistan is about 8 million. Only about 100,000 live in mountains. So 100,000 live on 80% of the land. That 100,000 are Pamiri, which is my ethnic group. We have Pamiris in Afghanistan, China, and Pakistan too. Um, we are we're people who farm. We do have some pastoralists with high mountain areas too. And it's the reason we work in Afghanistan too, is on that side, women are really critical farmers. And for us, obviously, the glaciers are important, the agriculture is important. But again, healing can't just happen in our earth and our land. Healing has to happen in us. We are a part of nature. And so for us, the idea that we can heal that really critical land and take care of it, and we can work with women who are in some of the worst situations in the world and give them ways to be independent, to make their own money, and just honestly, most critically, to feed their families through the winter is again, it's close to home because it is home. But it also is a reminder that we talk a lot about healing in Home Planet Fund, and it's because we have to think about it so holistically. And again, we really never talk about people separate from the land because if the land is hurting, we feel that hurt in us, whether we know it or not, whether we're from traditions who have language around that or not. And if we're not ready to kind of embrace the changes and the healing of the land, then the land isn't going to be ready for us either. So I know some people in the climate movement don't feel comfortable with that language, but like you said, that worldview is really important to us because it is that separation from land that got us to where we are in the crisis.
Right. I think everyone who'll probably watch this understands that too, the importance of we're part of nature. And it's very interesting to hear about Tajikistan and what you're doing there, because really, I didn't know about the glaciers there. Certainly didn't know about this and what a critical part it is for the planetary health, basically. Um, just as important as the rainforest, but we don't hear about that, and I'm not sure why. But just one last quick question is, what kind of foods are farmed in Tajikistan? What are some of the crops?
So the Soviet Union really had a really negative effect on the soil health in all of Central Asia, including Tajikistan. They forced them to grow things like corn and cotton, which is not made for like very thin, rocky soil and high mountain societies. Tajikistan, especially in Pamir, where I'm from, that's the name of it, and the name of the mountains, the Pamir Mountains. We have our own like dozens of varieties of local wheat that grow really well in kind of a short window. They grow really well in rocky soil. They're drought resistant. And actually, people digest them better because of our like thousands of years of evolution with them. So that a bunch of legumes, including different varieties of edamame that again are hyper local. Apples originate from Central Asia. So obviously a lot of heritage in apples, apricots, walnuts, pistachios. The pistachios were brought in. Those are not native. And let's see, those are the core crops that people use. Obviously, there are other things that have come in over thousands of years, but those are the core crops in the high
Apricots are my favorite, so I definitely want to go now.
Okay.
So now I want to open it up for people who may have questions or comments about um, some of the ideas that came through in our interview. Sometimes it takes a minute or so. There must be somebody who wants to say something.
Sure.
Fran, go ahead.
So you mentioned that you work in four ecosystems. So now we've talked about the East Africa. We've talked about the Central Asia. What are the other two?
Thanks, Fran. Hi. Thanks for coming. It's the other two, so the grasslands in East Africa, the glaciers and regenerative agriculture in Central Asia. We work in the South Pacific, in the Pacific Islands, and there obviously it's mitigation and adaptation. So we do on-land agroforestry, right? So that people don't have to like ship in at great oil expense their food. But even more frankly, it's like coral restoration and ocean regeneration, both on the coast and further into the deep sea. So that's the third one is the Pacific. We started in 7 islands in the South Pacific and we're expanding. And last but not least, we work in Alaska. We work in the Tongass, which is a temperate rainforest. It is the world's largest and most intact temperate rainforest. So it's in the southeast of Alaska. And again, just from a carbon perspective, a biodiversity perspective, and even something as simple as like salmon coming back to go inland and lay their eggs, but then the salmon skeletons being used by trees to grow and fortify themselves. The Tongass is an incredible ecosystem that we're so lucky to have in the US. So that's our fourth outsized climate ecosystem.
Great, very interesting.
Yeah.
So who else would like to ask something?
Well, let me just follow up and ask if you're planning to bring on any other ecosystems.
I don't think so. We've had so
Mhm.
many people ask us, like, will you please
Mhm.
work in South America? Or
Mhm.
will you consider name whatever ecosystem you want to say? For us, the data was very, very clear when we looked at it and it hasn't changed. And so
Mhm.
what we did was we looked at UNFCCC data, which is where all of kind of the scientific journals across academia come together at the UN to say what are outsized ecosystems from climate and biodiversity. Then we overlaid where money was going from the UN, from countries, from philanthropy, et cetera, and we looked at where the gap was. So in looking at that data, even 4 years later, it hasn't changed. And
Yeah.
so the reality is while, for example, Brazil or the Amazon need a lot more support, of course, there are trillions of dollars going into that. And then there's like no money going, for example, into Central Asia. And so right now, I don't think we plan to add any more. We do plan to expand in each ecology. For example, like I said, in the South Pacific, we're moving into French Polynesia. In East Africa, we're really looking at Ethiopia, their grasslands, and potentially Somaliland as well.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Very disciplined.
Yes, very focused. Who else would like to? I know all of you have thoughts in your mind, so I'm hoping someone else will ask or make a comment.
I'm actually thinking about something off of the climate conversation, but I'm very intrigued with your obviously very high educational accomplishments. And I'm wondering if you've been able to have an impact on the educational system for women in Tajikistan.
Thanks, Kimberly. That's a topic close to my heart. You know what? Tajikistan's an anomaly because it was part of the Soviet Union. It has had 100% literacy since I think, gosh, maybe the 50s or 60s. So literacy is not really an issue in Tajikistan. Poverty is, but literacy is not. And then specifically for the Palmyra community, the role of women is very, very high. And education is a really big part of like spirituality. So you're not just learning because the Soviet forced you. We believe that in order to show gratitude for the blessings of this earth, you have to continue to learn and grow to understand. And so, thank goodness that's not an issue we face in Tajikistan.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Okay, someone else? Oh, they're so mute today.
Oh,
I hear, okay, Ned, I hear you.
oh, it works. Now, I've had so much trouble with the mechanical thing here, so I don't have my thing on. Anyway, so I got to hear a lot of your presentation, Dilafruz. It was fascinating to me. And I'm thinking of here I am, I'm sitting in the United States, and we're producing such incredible harm on the ecosystems of the entire planet that you're trying to solve way over there, on the other side. But meanwhile, we seem to be, for the most part, our population is unaware of the magnitude of damage we're contributing to the ecology of the planet. And so I'm trying to see what can we do for a wake-up call so we can start transforming our economy to be not so terribly destructive. So I'd just be interested, any ideas you got, because you're working so hard on the fringes of glaciers and so forth, being very clever. But anyway, that's all I can think of in listening to you. The damage on this end is just without bounds. We're just unaware.
Yeah. I don't have an answer, Ned. I wish I could. I think that like this is a question that I know Yvonne really struggles with, and it's why so much of Patagonia's advertisement isn't actually advertisement for the clothing. It's advertisement for bear's ears or Alaska or Chile or Patagonia, like Patagonia, the location. I don't know how to what is it? Square the circle, circle the square. Sorry, American idioms are not.
That's okay.
I I think, to be honest, the places I work, one of the reasons it works so well and at scale is because these communities have not lost this connection to land, right?
Yep.
I think one of the challenges we face in the US is we have had so much convenience for so long that we really are asking people, like if we really meant to go to more sustainable ways, we are asking people to give stuff up, right? So even, for example, one of the things I care a lot about is food systems. And kind of long story short, I really tried to work with farmers across the Midwest to produce heritage oats, right? And try to do this marketing campaign around heritage oats and what does it mean? And beyond our own government getting in our way, the thing is the idea that you can't have your strawberries year round, right? You have to wait for this 3-month, 2-month season, and then you really shouldn't have it again, right? Or you have to wait for your tomatoes to ripen. And I think that one of the things we have to face ourselves in the US is that we have to be okay not having everything we've had. And we have to realize that that is a sacrifice worth making. And Ned, I don't know, maybe we open this up do other people have ideas about how we change behaviors in our own backyards?
We've had a few programs on the degrowth movement.
Oh, yeah.
where we've actually discussed this, and I think there is a tremendous reticence to take on degrowth in any significant way. And I think, we look at it at two levels. One would be personally, where what are we doing to help degrowth, be less of consumers? But that's only a small drop in the bucket when you look at the Pentagon budget and what they're doing to the environment, or major corporations and agribusiness. These are all contributing much larger pieces, and it's like, how does that get changed? Because without changing that level, anything we do is almost irrelevant. So that's one thing we've looked at, talked about, and will continue to talk about. I see Norman has got his hand up, and then Jerry. So go ahead, Norman. Unmute. You need to unmute, Norman.
There we go. Can you
Yeah.
hear me? I apologize for not having a picture of this on my little box, but this is the way the technology works today. I'm impressed by the way you express yourself. You Many of these kinds of discussions start with a very formal presentation, and a lot of it is clearly thought out, often by a committee, and is very well stated. And then after that, it comes the questions. In your case, you've from the very beginning, you've expressed yourself in very clear terms about some very complex concepts and principles, and you come from, as you said, the smallest former Russian colony, if that's the right word, which is not exactly a place where a great many people we think of anyway come from that speak in a broad way about world issues. And I wonder what and then you talk about having two members of staff. So clearly you're a very small group. As someone who's run an international NGO for the past 40 years, I know the difficulty in finding people like you. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about, on the one hand, how to find those kinds of people, which is a very simple question with a very complicated answer. And the other is what an organization like yours, might do to actually sponsor, and maybe does sponsor, others like yourself, because you are really part of the future. You are clearly dealing with a piece of the future that others are not dealing with directly, and have chosen to do that through the people that have supported you. And I think you are almost yourself a replicable model. Were we able to figure out how to do it? And I don't mean to go on about this, but seeing you today has given me new hope for finding the kinds of people you are, because I continue to do that and pass them on to opportunities of different kinds. So anyway, a big long statement. But do you have any thoughts on what I've just said?
Um, I'm really flattered. I'm a little embarrassed, but I can't. I think your compliment belongs to maybe my grandparents and my great grandma and my parents. And I think that I think Norman, what you said at the end really stuck with me is you're looking out for people like me and you're helping them. And I think that if I can say I don't think I'm innate. I don't think I'm exceptional. I agree with you. I think I'm a replicable model. And I think the reason why is because I've had wonderful mentors who have pushed me and grown me. And when I didn't think it was possible, they really kind of showed me pathways I didn't know were open to me, and I think that that is the only reason I'm sitting here today. And so I think people like you who really take a chance and who really try to guide anybody, but especially young folks and maybe those of us who are immigrants and new to contexts means the world. Because the only reason I'm here is because I had my first internship and I had the hand holding in my first job and even kind of the people who continue to guide me today. So that's all I can offer.
It's a modest answer. Thank you. Yeah.
I think Jerry had a question. Jerry, do you?
Yeah, not so much a question as kind of some further commentary on degrowth, which of course, as you know, Georgia, is something I've done a lot of thinking about. And the whole issue of how overwhelming it can seem to try and affect systemic change. That's, because unlike any other environmental issue, the climate, the cumulative impacts analysis for the climate is global. And so it can always seem like any individual or small group or act that we do can feel inconsequential in relation to what, the scale that we really need to affect. But one way that I think about it is that we're trying to shift cultural norms. So, and in terms of giving things up, I've done a lot of thinking and talking and trying to engage people with that. And I don't feel like I've had a lot of success. I'm beginning to have a little bit of influence over the Sierra Club, which was until recently really not willing to openly even talk about degrowth. For me, it's just what I'm motivated to do. Uh, I particularly focus on travel and air travel because air travel is such a huge source of climate greenhouse gas emissions, and very few people even think about it when they make travel plans. So I'll stop there.
Okay. Any comments on that, Dilafruz?
Um, I I just had a question, I guess a follow-up question is like, what about collectives? You know, Georgia knows a lot more about this than I do, but what about like collectives who try new things? Or I just learned a new term just earlier this week is micro utopias. Like, do you think that those things at smaller scales are good to try because then eventually they could be replicable models? Or do you think that we're kind of too late and we need bigger systemic change to get to where we need to be in the crises?
Probably need both, but I think Mondragon for me is a really good model about a regional way of working collectively and completely changing a system, because 70 years ago, that whole region was so impoverished. It was the poorest area of Spain. Today, it's the wealthiest area, not because people are so wealthy, but because they've eliminated poverty and because there's been this collective mentality about how to deal with their lifestyle, with their environment, with work. It's a whole system and ethic. And I think, when we're talking about the difference between a regional model, which they are, but it is replicable and they will insist it's replicable, even though people say, oh, our society is so individualistic, it can't happen here. But it can happen in certain areas, it can happen locally. And I think maybe that's where part of us would have to focus. But then there are the bigger issues that aren't just getting on an airplane. They're the whole Pentagon budget. There's the whole agriculture business. There's the pesticide business. There are all these things that have such a huge impact, much more than, whether I'm going to ride a bus or ride a plane. It's huge. So I think we have to work on both of these. And I know Fran wants to ask something, but if you have any further comment on that, Dilafruz, I'd go to you, back to you first.
No, maybe I'll punt to Jerry in case he has anything to say on that.
Do you have anything more, Jerry, before I go to Fran?
Yeah, I pretty much agree with everything you just said. I mean, creating replicable models is a really important thing. And Mondragon is without question one of the most valuable models and obviously replicable if we can create the kind of mentality that was that made Mondragon happen. And, all I can say is, well, one thought I've had recently is that we need to be really willing to embrace how bad things are, because we need that kind of realization to get beyond the resistance to make the kind of fundamental systemic change we need to make. And I know, like working with the Sierra Club people, a lot of them still try to remain, optimistic somehow. And I think that's kind of self-defeating at this point. So that's a thought I've been having.
Okay. Do you want to say anything about that, or should I go to Fran Dilafruz?
Maybe I'll give Fran time. I'm mindful.
Okay, Fran, go ahead.
Well, as Georgia, as you bring up Mondragon, it suddenly raised the question for me regarding your home planet work in these four ecosystems. And we've learned a lot from you about how you're addressing these fundamental ecosystem issues. But how about the institutional side? Sort of, are you working with these people, whether it's in the Tongass or the Pacific Islands or Tajikistan, on institutional structures that are more sustainable and equitable?
Thank you. Yeah. Yes, and yes, and I mean, I think there's two ways I can answer. One is when we fund into these contexts, we fund into whatever the traditional indigenous structure is. So for example, in Central Asia, they're called mahalas, which means like village decision-making networks. It's where people pool funding. It's where when somebody is going to get married, everyone gives them money, or like they are pre-existing ways to manage conflict, manage finances, like take care of folks, seek justice, etc. And so we really try to support those in each context. In as much as we do institutional building, honestly, I would say we're really careful because these structures have existed and they have naturally formed and evolved in these communities. They're not the way a nonprofit is, where you can say, well, we need you to catch up with the times. We think you're not thinking about DEI in the same way. So we try to come in with a lot of compassion, right? And we try to there are things we look out for, right? Like, are women involved? Are young people involved? What is like the internal view on disabilities? Or like those are things we look at, but we try really hard not to use those words because obviously they're like a very particular construct. For the most part, because these communities have kept these systems, they have also evolved to include women, to have youth. Like, we haven't yet faced a culture, even in Afghanistan, right, where we have felt that it misaligned with our ethics. Where we do institution building is, one, we've started doing funding where it's for healing. But what it means is for the community to do ceremony, or if like the solstice is really important, for them to do dancing, and for them to basically do things that grow and support them as peoples so that they're not burnt out, so that the youth can have knowledge sharing and take on the mantle from the elders, etc. So we think about institutional building in that way. And then the other way maybe you're alluding to is government. We are very careful about working with the government. We don't work with any government directly for obvious reasons. In many cases, the government is the aggressor and the problem against these communities. And so, for example, in Tanzania, the current government has been cracking down on some of our partners. We have funded their fleeing into Kenya. We have funded their legal cases, but we don't do it directly. We just do it when the community brings it up and we feel it's in service of them and in service of the land. For many of these communities, they are really trying hard to push back against a very growth-centered idea of progress. So like how many hospitals, how many roads, who has what electricity. They're trying so hard to retain their values. And so sometimes I feel that Home Planet Fund really is trying to like help them push against the tide of maybe what the government is trying to impose on them with sometimes best intentions, sometimes ill intentions, but that's why this question is so hard for me to answer is we engage in a push-pull sometimes with things that feel like they're for the greater good, but actually are just enforcing a very globalized Western consumer life onto these indigenous communities.
Okay, I think we'll take a last question from Norman.
Well, it's not so much a question as an observation. Uh, some time ago, I was with a team that did work in Samoa, both Samoa itself and American Samoa, which is an interestingly made over version of Samoa. And we saw the effects of civilization, I guess, in one word, on what was really an indigenous community. And we also saw the image of the indigenous community continuing in American Samoa as a almost an underground organization. Um, with the stories passed, many of them orally, and many of them, as oral stories tend to be, getting very mixed up as they got passed along, and many of them relating to how the land was used and how it was proposed to be used in the future, which was often not in any way compatible with what it perhaps should have been used for. And so we began to scratch our heads about that because we were finding it difficult to get into and talking to the indigenous community. And one day, a very elderly gentleman came to us and said he was willing to share with us something that he had hidden for many, many years, which was turned out to be a series of writings by a priest who had been assigned to Samoa in many, many years ago, and who had become so interested in the indigenous process and their view of the land that he began to write down what were actually forbidden writings for him. He was not allowed to believe in the things that he was hearing, but he went ahead and did it. And he had this now written compendium of all of these stories. And so we began, frankly, to sort of begin to steal the stories. We took them and we began to talk with them, with the people in the Angas and the villages of the area. And eyes began to brighten up. People began to respond because they were hearing their hidden stories coming from us, coming from another source about something they could do for the future. And it was one of those aha moments, which was interesting. I mean, it could easily have been misused because it could easily have been a means of drafting them, you might say, into the modern processes that were being proposed for business reasons. But because we gently brought it in, particularly through the local villagers and their leaders, we were fairly successful in getting that resown in the process. But and the point I make here is only that the oral system needed to be translated into writing to be able to go back to the oral system to be reused. And it was one of those things that just seemed to be, and of course we had the voice was in itself a Christian minister, a Christian priest who was looking at it from the outside, but amazed by it as he wrote. And it was that amazement that I think made it so valuable. So I just mention that as something maybe wrap in, because I think these kinds of processes are going on even in America. I think they're going on in communities where things were done in different ways and are not done that way now, and need to go back to those ways to be able to survive and to prosper. So anyway, just
Thank you
excuse
for
me for
that.
throwing in stories, but
Thank you for that story. And it reminds me, the whole Mondragon Cooperatives also
yeah,
came from a vision of the Catholic priest.
exactly.
It was
Exactly.
sent to that region. So
Yeah.
it's a vision, that somebody will have and see that this has to be
Yeah.
promoted and extended. So I want to thank you, Dilafruz, for taking the time with us today and explaining all these things. It's been really riveting, I think. I've learned a lot. So I appreciate so much what you're doing.
Yes.
Thank you for having me in this community. And I just want to add, I'm so touched by what Norman said and what you said, Georgia, and what a nice way to wrap up. It reminds me of something really important is like none of us are an island unto ourselves, right? And sometimes we need people who love us to hold a mirror so we can find ourselves. And I feel like that's why community is important, like what Norman said, Georgia, what you're saying. And I feel it's just a reminder why spaces like this are really important too. So I'm grateful for you guys holding a mirror and asking questions and letting me be a part of this community.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you so much.